The City Beneath the Turning Sky. Chapter 7. The Fracture. Rain continued to fall across the spiral city. It drifted against the tall windows of the Hall of Clockmakers in soft silver sheets, blurring the distant towers into pale silhouettes. Beyond the glass, the great clocks continued their endless turning. Their bells rang through the mist, measured, predictable, certain. Inside the hidden archive, certainty felt very far away. Velen sat motionless beside the desk. The black ledger remained open before him. Its yellowed pages lay illuminated beneath the warm glow of the lantern. The words still stared back at him. The first question, again, and again, and again, across centuries, across generations, different hands, different ink, different ages, yet always the same phrase, as though history itself had become trapped in a single thought. Across from him, Master Orin remained silent. The old clockmaker's gaze rested upon the rain-streaked window. For once he seemed unsure what to say. Velen had never seen that before. The man always seemed to have an answer, or at least a direction. Now he appeared lost within memories of his own. At last Velen broke the silence. What happened to them? Orin's eyes shifted toward him. Who? The people who asked. The room fell quiet once more. The lantern flame flickered softly. Rain tapped against the glass. The ones who followed the question. Velen glanced down at the pages. The ones who caused the fracture. Orin studied him carefully. For a moment, something like approval appeared in his expression. The question had changed. Velen was no longer asking what. He was asking why. Before the old clockmaker could answer, a distant sound echoed through the hall. A bell, low, ancient, unlike any bell Velen had heard before. A single note, deep enough to be felt rather than heard. The vibration seemed to travel through the stone itself. Orin closed his eyes. The color drained slightly from his face. No, he murmured. The bell sounded again. Once, only once, then silence. Velen frowned. What was that? Orin stood. Slowly, as though he already knew the answer. They're here. A chill traveled through the room. Velen rose immediately. The order? Orin nodded. Neither moved. The silence that followed felt different from the others. Expectant, listening, waiting. Then footsteps echoed beyond the hidden archive. Soft, measured, unhurried. Someone was approaching. Not the hurried pace of a messenger, not the confident stride of a city official. Each step seemed deliberate, precise, as though no movement was ever wasted. The footsteps stopped beyond the doorway, then resumed. Closer. The lantern flame trembled. Velen found himself holding his breath. At last a figure appeared within the entrance. Dark robes, rainwater glistening upon the folds of the cloak, silver thread woven into a spiral across the chest. A smooth glass mask concealed the face entirely. The mask reflected the lantern light like still water. For several moments, nobody spoke. The figure simply stood there, motionless, observing. Velen felt something deeply unsettling. Not fear, awareness. The sensation that he was being studied. Not judged, studied. The figure inclined its head toward Orin. Not quite a bow. Not quite a greeting. Then it spoke. Its voice was calm. Soft. Neither male nor female. Almost impossible to place. We thank you for receiving us. The words settled heavily into the room. Velen immediately noticed it. Not, I thank you, but we thank you. The figure stepped forward. Rainwater dripped softly onto the stone floor. Again it spoke. We apologize for the interruption. Velen glanced toward Orin. The old clockmaker had noticed the same thing. Of course he had. The visitor's attention shifted toward him. Though the mask concealed its face, Velen somehow knew it was looking directly at him. For a moment neither spoke. Then curiosity overcame caution. What should I call you? The room became still. The figure remained motionless. Not offended, not surprised. Confused, as though the question itself required consideration. Several seconds passed. Then, We have not used names for some time. Velen blinked. The answer was so unexpected that he wasn't entirely sure he had heard it correctly. What do you mean? The figure tilted its head slightly. Names become less necessary. A pause. With time, Velen looked toward Orin. The old clockmaker's expression darkened. The visitor continued. Everyone begins with a name. The lantern flickered. The words felt strangely sad. Not threatening, not proud, simply true, as though describing the weather. Or the turning of a clock. For the first time, Velen realized something. The Order had not abandoned names. They had outgrown them, and somehow that possibility frightened him more than if they had been monsters. The room remained silent. Rain tapped softly against the tall windows of the hidden archive. The lantern flame flickered between them. Velen could not stop staring at the figure, not because of the mask, not because of the robes, because of the answer. We have not used names for some time. The words lingered in his thoughts. Something about them felt profoundly wrong, or perhaps simply unfamiliar. Everyone had a name. Names were how people entered the world, how they were remembered, how they remained themselves. Without a name, what remained? The figure seemed to sense his confusion. We understand your concern. Again, not I. The visitor spoke as naturally as breathing, as naturally as a clockmaker might speak of gears or bells. Velen folded his arms. Do you? The figure became still. The glass mask reflected the lantern flame. For several moments there was no response. Then, not completely, the answer surprised him. The figure continued. It has been many years since we viewed the world through a single perspective. The room grew quiet. Even Orin seemed uncomfortable. Velen glanced toward the old clockmaker. You're acting as though this is normal. Orin sighed. For them it is. The visitor inclined its head slightly, a gesture that almost resembled agreement. Almost, Velen frowned. What does that even mean? For the first time, the figure moved toward the desk. Its gloved hand rested upon the open ledger. Carefully, respectfully, almost reverently, the Order preserves memory. Its fingers brushed the worn pages. One memory becomes many. The lantern light shimmered across the glass mask. One life becomes part of another. Velen felt a chill. The words sounded beautiful and unsettling, like a song whose meaning changed the longer one listened. The visitor looked down at the repeated phrase. The first question, again and again, across generations, across centuries, the same words, the same mystery, the same absence. For the first time, something changed in the visitor's posture. A stillness within the stillness, as though even the Order felt the weight of those words. At last Velen spoke. What was the fracture? The figure remained motionless. Rain whispered against the windows. The clocks continued turning beyond the hidden walls. Then, a wound. The answer was immediate. Certain, without hesitation. Velen frowned. A war? No. A rebellion? No. The figure's hand remained upon the ledger. A question. Silence followed. Heavy, unavoidable. The visitor's voice softened. Before the fracture, there were no clockmakers. It looked toward Orin. There was no order. Orin nodded quietly. Velen's attention sharpened. The visitor continued. There was only one body. The phrase struck him. Not organization, not society. Body, as though it had once been something living. We studied the pattern together. The figure's hand drifted across the pages. Memory. Time. Observation. Movement. The familiar words echoed through the room. Concepts Velen had encountered again and again. The foundations of everything. The visitor fell silent. Then, until the question was asked, Velen leaned forward. The lantern light danced across the pages. What question? The figure became very still. So still that for a moment it resembled a statue. Then, we do not know. The answer struck him harder than he expected. You don't know? No. The reply carried no embarrassment, no defensiveness, only fact. The question survives. The visitor looked down at the ledger. The person does not. The words sent a shiver through the room. Oren lowered his gaze, as though he had heard them many times before. Velen stared. Someone erased it. For the first time since entering the archive, the visitor reacted. Not dramatically, a subtle shift, almost sadness, almost grief. Then, no. The answer came quietly. We have spent centuries searching for it. The lantern crackled softly. Velen felt his pulse quicken. What do you mean searching? The visitor's hand moved toward one of the missing entries, the blank space where a name should have been. Where a life should have been. Where a person should have remained. We recovered fragments. It touched the page. We recovered records. Another page. We recovered consequences. Another, the same empty space. Again, and again, and again. But never the name. The visitor's voice lowered, almost to a whisper, as though history remembers the wound. Its fingers hovered over the blank space, but not what caused it. The room fell silent. No one moved. No one spoke. Outside, thunder rolled softly across the turning sky, and for the first time, Velen wondered if the missing name was not hidden at all. Perhaps it was something worse. Perhaps it was impossible to remember. The silence lingered. The rain continued its steady rhythm against the windows. Somewhere beyond the hidden archive, a clock struck the hour. Its distant chime echoed through the hall of clockmakers before fading into stillness once more. No one spoke. The blank space upon the page seemed to hold all of their attention. A name should have been there, a life, a person. Instead there was absence, a wound in history. Velen stared at it. The longer he looked, the more unnatural it felt. Not erased, not removed, missing, as though the page itself could no longer remember what had once occupied that space. At last he looked up. If nobody knows the question, his voice seemed strangely loud, then how do you know it divided the world? The figure turned toward him. The glass mask reflected the lantern light. For a moment, Velen thought the question might go unanswered. Then, because the fracture remains. The response was immediate, certain, like a mathematical truth. The figure moved slowly around the desk. Its robes whispered softly against the stone floor. We do not remember the spark. It paused. But we remember the fire. Velen felt a chill. The visitor continued. There are records from before the fracture. Its gloved hand rested upon another ledger. There are records from after the fracture. Another. But between them, the hand stopped. There is change. Oren finally spoke. The pattern was studied differently. The figure inclined its head. Yes. The old clockmaker's voice was quiet, thoughtful, as though an entire civilization stopped asking certain questions. The visitor looked toward him. We believe that is precisely what happened. The room fell silent once more. Velen's thoughts raced. He remembered the chamber of echoes, the silver threads, the voices, the pulse beneath the city, the sensation of standing before something vast and ancient, something that had been waiting. What frightened them? He asked. Neither answered immediately. The lantern crackled softly. Outside, lightning flashed somewhere beyond the city. The visitor finally spoke. The possibility of change. Velen frowned. What does that mean? The figure turned toward the window, toward the rain, toward the city beyond. Its reflection stared back from the glass. A dark silhouette crowned by silver light. Imagine, it said softly, a map. Velen waited. If the map changes every time it is observed? The figure paused. Can it still be trusted? The question settled heavily between them. The pattern records reality, it continued. Memory. Movement. Connection. Cause. Consequence. Its voice lowered. But what if observation does more than reveal? The lantern flickered. For the first time, genuine unease touched Oren's expression. The visitor continued. What if observation participates? The words seemed to alter the atmosphere of the room. Not because they were dramatic, because they felt true, dangerously true. Velen found himself thinking of the chamber, of the pulse answering, of the feeling that something had become aware of him. Not before, after he observed it. The thought unsettled him. The visitor turned back toward the desk, toward the blank space, toward the missing name. Some believed understanding should continue. Its fingers rested upon the ledger. Others believed understanding had already gone too far. Oren crossed his arms, and so they divided. Yes. The answer carried centuries of weight. The visitor's hand slowly withdrew from the page. The keepers of the pattern became many things. The clockmakers, the order, other traditions now lost. Velen stared. So the fracture never ended. For the first time, the visitor became completely still. Then, no. The reply was almost a whisper. The fracture continues. Lightning illuminated the room. For a brief moment, the glass mask became a mirror. Velen saw his own reflection staring back at him. Then darkness returned. The visitor turned toward him, slowly, deliberately, as though studying something. Not his face, something beneath it, something deeper. The silence stretched, long enough to become uncomfortable. Then, you asked similar questions. Velen blinked. What? The visitor remained motionless. We have seen this before. A chill moved through him. The words felt wrong, not threatening. Familiar, as though spoken from a memory he did not possess. Oren's expression hardened. The old clockmaker stepped forward slightly. Protectively, the visitor noticed. Of course it noticed. Everything seemed to be noticed by the order. After several moments, it inclined its head. Not quite an apology. Not quite a retreat. Then quietly, we mean no harm. The lantern flame flickered. The rain continued falling. And somewhere beneath the spiral city, far below stone, far below memory, the ancient pulse stirred once more, as though listening, as though waiting, as though it recognized something in Velen too. The hidden archive had grown darker. Outside, the rain continued to sweep across the spiral city. Shadows gathered between the shelves. The lantern's warm glow seemed smaller than before, as though the room itself had expanded around them. Velen could not shake the feeling that he stood at the edge of something vast. Something older than the city. Older than the clockmakers. Older even than the order. The masked figure stood motionless beside the desk. Its glass face reflected the scattered lantern light. For several moments nobody spoke. Then Velen asked the question that had been forming in his mind since the visitor arrived. What were they called? The figure remained still. The people before the fracture. The rain whispered against the windows. The ones who became the clockmakers and the order. At last the visitor answered, their original name has survived. Something in Oren's expression shifted. Not surprise, recognition. The visitor continued. Though few now remember it. Its gloved hand rested upon a closed ledger. Their name was... The silence stretched. Then, the keepers of the pattern. The words settled heavily within the room. Velen felt them immediately. Not because of their meaning. Because they felt familiar, as though he had heard them somewhere before. In a dream. A story. A memory that wasn't quite his own. The keepers of the pattern, he repeated. The visitor inclined its head. They observed. They recorded. They remembered. Its voice softened. They believed understanding and preservation were one purpose. The lantern flame flickered, but eventually they discovered they were not. Velen looked down at the ledgers, at the blank spaces, at the missing name. And that caused the fracture? No. The answer came immediately. The visitor's attention settled upon the empty space within the record. This caused the fracture. Its finger hovered above the absence, not touching it, almost as though it feared to. Velen stared. One person? We do not know. One question? We do not know. The repetition sent a chill through him. What do you know? For the first time, the visitor seemed almost human. Almost weary. Its shoulders lowered slightly. Its voice became quieter. We know the consequences. The answer carried a sadness unlike anything Velen had heard before. Not grief, regret, centuries of it. The visitor slowly turned another page. More blank spaces, more missing entries, more wounds in history. Then something caught Velen's eye. A symbol, small, almost hidden, drawn repeatedly beside the missing name. A simple mark. 3 interwoven spirals. Not the symbol of the order, not the mark of the clockmakers. Something older. Something forgotten. What is that? The visitor looked toward it. For a moment the room seemed to grow colder. Then, a remnant. The answer was almost whispered. A memory. Velen frowned. Of who? The visitor did not answer. Instead, it looked directly at him. Through the glass mask. Through the lantern light. Through the silence. The sensation was unsettling. Not because he felt watched. Because he felt recognized. At last the visitor spoke. You asked similar questions. The words echoed through the room. Oren immediately stiffened. Velen noticed. So did the visitor. The silence that followed felt dangerous. Not physically dangerous. Historically dangerous. As though they had stepped close to something sleeping. Something ancient. Something listening. Velen swallowed. What does that mean? The visitor's head tilted slightly. A gesture almost curious, almost sad. Then, we do not know. Again, the same answer. Yet this time it carried a different meaning. Not ignorance, uncertainty, as though even the order had reached the limits of what it understood. The visitor stepped back. Its robes whispered softly against the stone. The meeting was ending. The rain continued beyond the windows. The city continued turning. The clocks continued counting moments. The visitor moved toward the doorway, then paused. For the first time since arriving, it looked not at Oren. Not at the ledgers, not at the missing name. At Velen, directly, and when it spoke, its voice seemed older than the room itself. Older than the city, older than memory. History remembers events. A pause. The pattern remembers movements. The lantern flickered. The visitor turned away. Then, and sometimes, another pause. Long enough for Velen to feel his heart beat. And the pattern remembers what history forgets. The figure disappeared into the darkness beyond the archive. Its footsteps faded. The bell sounded once. Low, ancient, final. Silence returned. Velen remained standing beside the desk. The blank space stared back at him from the page. The missing name. The first question. The fracture. The keepers of the pattern. All connected. All incomplete. And for the first time, Velen began to wonder if the mystery he was chasing was not hidden in the past at all. Perhaps it was still moving. Still unfolding. Still waiting. Somewhere beyond memory.